his father was able to purchase the freedom of both the families and merge them together. His father was a cobbler. He also, once he attained their freedom, he was able to hire a Confederate officer's wife to teach his son to read and write. And that gentleman, we know him as Flipper, Lieutenant Colonel Flipper, and he was the first African American to graduate from the West Point Academy. Now, he wasn't the first. Flipper was not the first. There were 3 others that went before him, but they weren't able to graduate. Shortly after he graduated, shortly after he got there was another gentleman that joined him in that class named John Hanks Alexander. And then shortly after that, another gentleman by the name of Charles Young also graduated. So those are your first 3 African Americans. And 2 of them spent a lot of time here in Ohio, down at Wilberforce Academy, or Wilberforce University. And they went on to achieve very high rankings and lead their own troops. Flipper had a misunderstanding. He was very, very well known. He was very well liked. But it was tough for him at the academy. He spent 4 years at the academy. At that time, the academy was obviously predominantly white. There were 76 students in that class. And remember, we had 3 of them that flunked out. Flipper graduated 56 out of that class. And for 4 years, no one spoke to him other than his instructors. So can you imagine being in a situation where no one speaks to you day in and day out? But when he graduated, when he went to pick up his commission, everyone in the academy stood up and gave him a standing ovation. He later went on to be assigned up to a fort out in Texas. He had developed quite a friendship with a young lady who was the daughter of the commander of the fort. But there was another officer there who took a fancy to this lady and didn't like the fact that she had turned him down for marriage. He blamed that reason because of her relationship with Mr. Flipper. Long story short, Mr. Flipper was set up on embezzlement charges and he was court-martialed. He went on to start a successful surveyor company. He also went to do a lot of extensive work for the Mexican government. And he actually wrote 3 volumes of engineering for the Mexican government. And he went on to have, again, like I said, a very successful career. And years later, after his death, he was pardoned by President Clinton. The Army, several years before that, recognized that the treatment that they gave him was too harsh for the crime that he allegedly had committed, even though he hadn't. Another gentleman we heard talk about is Lieutenant Colonel Charles Young, also taught down at Wilberforce University, and he went on to do some great things. He is responsible for the national park system that we have today. He was out in California, Sequoia National Park, and it was him and his Buffalo Soldiers that protected those giant redwood trees. They kept people from trying to cut them down and damage them, and then they designed a park system that we use today. And he went on to have a very, very, very long and fruitful career. We also had one woman who joined the Buffalo Soldiers.
Kathy Williams.
Kathy Williams, somebody knew that. All right. All right, Kathy Williams. Kathy Williams was a slave. And she died, her slave master died during the Civil War. And when the Union Army came through Missouri, they just took the slaves with them. And she ended up becoming a cook for General Sheridan, one of the generals for the North. After that war was over, she saw there's an opportunity for me to do something. So, with her cousin and a good friend, they joined the Buffalo Soldiers. Now, bear in mind, it wasn't no physical, so she disguised herself as a man, and she changed her name from Kathy Williams to William Kathy. And she served for 2 years before she was found out. Now, depending on what source you read, some say she faked the illness, others said that she came down with an illness. She was a diabetic. And once she was in the hospital and it was discovered she was a female, obviously they gave her an honorable discharge. And she went on to start a laundry business and a seamstress, and she kind of meandered through the West. And we don't know what happened to her. She was married for a short time. Her husband stole some money from her. She went after him, got her money back, and I understand he wasn't in too good a shape physically after she finished with him. We can't condone domestic violence, but I'm sure there was something along that lines. But anyway, she went on, and last we knew about her, she was running a laundry and a seamstress business in Trinidad, Colorado. And she's buried somewhere in an unmarked grave, and they guess that the time she died was somewhere around the age of 49. All right. As we fast forward into World War I and World War II, Buffalo soldiers were not allowed to engage in battle on behalf of the United States. So what you have is that in World War II, and I'm going to talk about this gentleman, his name is John Robert Fox. John Robert Fox was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. And he enlisted in the United States Army after receiving a commission when he was in college, and he came out as a second lieutenant. He was sent over to Italy, northern Italy, him and about 7 other African Americans to fight in Italy and protect some of those northern villages. On December 26, 1944, day after Christmas, John Robert Fox was 29 years old. The Germans had snuck into the village the night before in civilian clothing. Over 100 Germans. They had wiped out most of the Italian troops, and what few American troops had moved on. John Fox said, I'm going to stay here and see if I can't get some artillery directed to this village to kill these Germans. So that morning, or that afternoon on December 26th, he radioed for some artillery to be ordered to his position based on the radio signals. So he started shelling and sending some ammunition that way. But the Germans were still coming stronger and stronger and about ready to take over the whole village. He called back to the radio people and said, hey, we need more artillery. The radio operator on the other end said, if I send any more artillery, you're going to get killed in that shelling. The radio operator relayed that without hesitation, John Robert Fox said, fire it. And sure enough, they did. The next morning, when the American troops came into that area, there were almost 100 dead Germans in John Robert Fox. He received, in 1997, from Bill Clinton, his wife, his widow, received a Congressional Medal of Honor. If you go to that village in northern Italy, and I don't recall the name right now, but those village people erected a monument to those 7 Italians and him that died in that battle fight. In 1993, the United States Army did some research, and they recognized that they overlooked the African Americans' participation in World War II. And because of that, they went back and they looked at some of the soldiers that were highly decorated, and they found 7 of them that they promoted up to Congressional Medals of Honor. John Fox was one of them. The other soldier that they also promoted up to that was a gentleman by the name of Vernon Baker. Vernon Baker was the only soldier still alive in 1997 to receive his medal. And he was a little bitter, but he did recognize it was long overdue. And he lived to be 90. He had 5 wives, 7 children, and he had a little ranch up in Montana, and he didn't die till 2010. So just a little something about those gentlemen that help what they do.